Honestly provocative talk at LarsLarson.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I've been telling you for a long time that in elections you have to make sure it's because if it's not close, then they can't cheat. Whoever you want they to be, usually it's the Democrats who do the cheating. I just spent some time in Indiana with some great friends at 95.3 MNC, and Casey Hendrickson, one of them, who I got a chance to spend some time with at an event called Noise, which has been put on every year for the last 3 years. A lot of fun. Brian Kilmeade was there from Fox News, and Casey, and others from the station, including my old boss, Baby James Derby. We call him Baby because he still gets carded, and he's like 90 years old now. But anyway, Casey sends me a text message and says there is something going on in Indiana involving tens of thousands of votes that got counted after the fact. Now, we're only a day out from the election, and the nonsense is already beginning. Casey, welcome to the program, and thanks for coming on to explain what is it that happened involving these magically, digitally appearing votes in Indiana.
Well, I don't know. My mind's just been blown because I now know why Derby is leaned over and hunched over all the time when he's walking. I didn't know he was 90 years old.
He's at least 90, and every time he wants to buy a six-pack of beer, he gets carded for that. So it's terrible.
All right, so Lars, here's what's happened. So this is in St. Joseph County. Now, St. Joseph County is where South Bend resides, as well as several other major cities here in Indiana. We're on the border of...
For everybody who's not following.
Yeah, exactly. So we end up hearing today that we went with our live election coverage until 11 p.m. last night because we cover Indiana and Michigan, and we had all of our results for Indiana, and we woke up this morning and realized that 3 races had been completely changed. And they got changed because there was 22,000 early and absentee ballots that had not been counted yet. And they should have, obviously, you know this, they should have been counted before we went to the polls yesterday. Those should have been factored in the early results as we were covering the election last night, and they weren't counted. So now they counted them this morning. They flipped 3 races. They changed a court, they changed a school board, and they changed a state house seat or a state representative seat in District 7. So we're looking at this and we're all going, what in the world is happening? And so, Lars, what ends up happening is I get a precinct captain call my program and say, hey, this is weird because I was told to expect an update on my tablet with the absentee and early votes, and I'm looking at my numbers and I see that they changed. And I have 215 more people voted than actually physically walked into my precinct. Now, I will say that I've had other people at their precincts call and go, we were not expecting that type of an update, and that didn't happen at our precinct. So we don't know what the exact details are with that one caller's precinct, but they were saying that they had 215 more votes than physical voters actually walked into their precinct that day. But regardless, these 22,000 ballots should have been counted before we ever went to election coverage last night.
Well, and how do you get more votes in a precinct than the people who actually count? I mean, in fact, everybody should know that when you say we don't want to go to computerized voting, well, you're already there because you may mark a paper ballot. Most people in America do, but it gets counted by a computer. And once those numbers are in the computer, they're ones and zeros. And I worry because we've all, made mistakes where we've duplicated a file or something, and we say, how did I end up with 2 of those? Well, that happens with computers. Where I don't want to see it happen is in voting. So do you have any indication, and are they going to be able to be capable of sorting this out? And you mentioned that some of this was added digitally. What does that mean?
Well, basically what he was telling us is that he was told to expect that the early and absentee votes that had already been counted would be added to his precinct. So he was expecting the number to jump up. They told him to look at it at noon. It happened at noon, and they added 215 votes, and that was supposed to be from the early and absentee votes, he says. Well, at the end of the day, he's got 215 extra people because he's thinking that's the early and absentee ballots. But then today he comes on, we're cracking the news that these early and absentee votes hadn't actually been tallied. And he's like, well, then where did these 215 extra votes come from? So he doesn't know where they came from. We can report that others did not have that issue at all, and we're not expecting that to be downloaded into their tablets at their precinct. But this is also St. Joseph County. Now, we do have the election board. They're saying that they're going to meet with the vendor and try and figure out what happened. We've got the chair of the St. Joseph County Republican Party, Lynn Fitzpatrick. She is demanding a thorough investigation in this, as she should. But in St. Joseph County, Lars, we had a major voter fraud case in the 2008 primary, in the Democratic Party primary, where Obama would not have even been on the Indiana ballot had this fraud not happened. Indiana would have automatically gone to Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary, and actually we had somebody sentenced to prison for voter fraud with that case.
See, I remember when we talked about that, and I guess what strikes me as really frightening is if this can happen because somebody slips and says, well, we forgot to add these votes, and now we're adding them later. Or we have these votes, and they were counted once, but now we're going to count them again and add even more. Anybody who realizes that there may be a flaw in the system or an ability to exploit a system, gee, I could add a few hundred votes in this precinct or that precinct, and the computer will all make it look like it added up right. If that flaw is there, some crook will figure out how to exploit it. The same way everybody, all these crooks figure out how to exploit debit cards and all these other ways that they find to steal money. In this case, I worry that they might be trying to steal an election.
And as always, we will find out about the fraud months later, and they will say it's not enough to change the results of the election, and we just have to deal with it. So the fraud is almost never discovered before we have an election. Now, I'm not saying that this is election fraud. I want to make that very clear for anybody listening. But we have an issue with a 22,000 vote discrepancy, and we have at least one person in their precinct saying, well, those votes were added to mine, so are they being double counted, or do these 215 votes come from somewhere else? What's going on here? So there's some confusion, and this did result in the change in 3 different elections where we had winners last night that had now been overturned and different people are in. Hey, Lars, something strange about those winners. They benefited the Democratic Party, though, so that has a lot of people a little skeptical of what is actually going on.
So we do know that if you got, in any average precinct, if the precinct splits 60-40 Democrat-Republican, you'd expect the absentees perhaps to split a little differently. Sometimes absentees are a different group of people. But you worry that what they're going to do is say, and I've seen this happen in my home state of Washington, where they say, well, we've found all these fraudulent votes. And you say, yeah, you found fraudulent votes, but you can't say whether the fraudulent votes went for candidate A or candidate B. So therefore, we don't know if it would have changed the election. I mean, if you could add 200 fraudulent votes in favor of candidate A and no fraudulent votes in favor of candidate B, then candidate A gets the win instead. I'm really anxious to hear how this turns out. So, Casey, thanks for taking the time tonight to talk about it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lars.